Laura's going to talk tonight about her greatest fear, and the title of her speech is Failing to Grow. So let's welcome Laura.
Thanks, Toastmaster. So, I'm scared of a lot of things. A lot of things. Snakes, sharks, I'm scared of all of it. But I wouldn't say any of those things is my biggest fear. And my biggest fear, I think, is a fear that most people face in their lives, and that's the fear of failure. So I wanted to tell my story of the major times in my life that I've had to face this biggest fear that I have, and how I overcame that. And I remember my first meeting with all of you. I shared my story about math. And for those of you that weren't here, I used to love math. When I was young, I just always loved math. I loved the way the numbers came together and the way you felt when you got something right. And then came enriched grade 10 mathematics. And the teacher was boring, and I started working late nights, and I got confused with all the teenage drama that goes on in grade 10. And so I fell behind. And I'll never forget the feeling of the first math test I had when I looked at the question and just completely drew blank. Completely. I'll never forget it. I had never felt that way before. I'd never felt so low. I knew I was going to fail. And all I wanted was to run away and to never ever think about it again. And that's exactly what I did. I went into an arts degree and never did math. 6 years I never did subtraction without a calculator. I just forgot all about it. But somewhere in the back of my mind all those years was the feeling that I had missed a moment, that my ship had sailed off without me. And so later in life, after quitting a particularly demeaning part-time job, I thought about the missed connections, about where I wanted to be and where I was. And I realized that I had to fly to Scotland. See, when I moved to Canada, I was 6 years old, and I lost all contact with my dad. He remarried. I have a stepmom, stepsisters, but I barely knew them. I barely met them. And again, it was my fear of failure that was keeping me from them, because I felt that I would fail to impress them, that they weren't going to like me, that I wasn't good enough. And so then again, I realized that for the second time in my life, I was letting the fear of failure hold me back from being who I wanted to be. So I bought the plane ticket, and it was the hardest thing I ever did, still to this day, the hardest thing I ever did to get on that plane and go to Scotland. But I came back with no regrets. And I learned that I could face that fear of failure, and I could come out on top. And so, earlier this year, I was handed a terrifying opportunity, just absolutely terrifying. I had expressed interest in running as a youth candidate for the NDP in my home riding of Scarborough-Agincourt in Toronto. And in February, I was notified that my application was approved. So I could run as a federal candidate in the 2015 elections as soon as I was nominated. And when I got that approval, there it was again. There it was again, that moment again, that defining moment, where I thought, God, what if I fail? You know, here I was with a probability of failure. My chances weren't good. I wasn't even finished my undergraduate degree. It was my final semester of Canadian politics. And a young person, people would laugh in my face. I would let down my friends, myself, and everyone that believed in me. Who would sign up for this, I thought. But then I realized that this was my moment again. Just like when I got on that plane in Scotland. I didn't know the results, and there was a chance that I would fail, but I did it, and I didn't regret it. So, again, for the second time, I was nominated as the candidate on March 31st. And for 8 months, I knocked on doors, I put up signs, we did everything we could. And by the time election came, I had given it every bit of energy I had, every little piece of love, of hope, of optimism. I gave it everything. And we all know what happened. I knew that we gave everything we had to the election, all of our hearts, but by election day we were hoping for a miracle. And that miracle never came. We failed the worst we possibly could have, especially in Toronto. The NDP lost every seat. And I had faced my fear of failure, and this time I didn't come out on top. But in the weeks that came after that, I realized that no matter how it turned out, I still had no regrets. Even though we didn't win, there were moments that I wouldn't give up for the world. The first time I saw all the signs printed with my name on them, the first time someone told me they voted for me. These are moments that I wouldn't give up for the world. And that's when I realized that every time I had faced my fear of failure and gone through with it, I had no regrets, no matter how it turned out. But the only time I had a regret was the time that I didn't face that fear. It was the time when I gave up the thing I loved the most because I was afraid I would fail again. And so now, 6 or 7 years after that math test, I decided to go back and do math again. So here I am, studying statistics and economics at Carleton University. And I might fail. It's hard. It's really hard. But I realized that I'm never going to let my fear of failure stop me again. So the moral of my story is everybody faces the fear of failure. We all face it in our lives. And there's going to be times when you want to run away. But if you stay and you conquer that fear, you'll live a life without regret. Right, thank you. I did it.
All right, so a minute for you to fill out some evaluations for Laura and to pass it along
She
to
wants
her.
it down back.
I know.
Empty.
Failing to grow.
So Valerie, do you want to start setting up things?
Yes, please. If you like it, okay, you lose your card. If you lose your
Do whatever you have to do in the office.
Sure.
I've done that.
You're like, oh, lost my sentence. I can go spend
actually,
like a minute finding it.
I just need to turn
Dang
this
it.
on, so.
You used the lip ones? You got that?
I know, I didn't.
Oh crap, I just changed the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Tower?
You
Next time.
Was it just this that you
You know
wrote?
this one.
Oh no, I just turned it off for now.
It was off.
So what part of Scotland does your sister live in? Or
Huh?
your family? Which part of Scotland do you
Inverary Argyle.
Oh my gosh, that's where my cousins live in Argyle.
Oh,
Lockfield
it's a
Park.
small place. They probably
Yeah.
know each other.
Haha.
That's what I think it's. Remove this one. You still need it here?
No thank you, I'll probably use this.
Just do it.
So shall I?
I think I screwed it up.